Welcome back to the Forge with another exciting episode of topics that we as men need to hear. And today we're going to be talking about silence and how we can use it as a tool. But what most of us tend to recognize silence as the weaponized version that happens in relationships where you hear the so-called silent treatment. And that's not what we're here to talk about today. We do want to address that because we do acknowledge that that exists. But we want to focus on how silence can be used not only as a way to effectively communicate with others by showing presence in the situation, but it also can be used as a tool to develop leadership within the group dynamics and your primary relationships and stuff like that. So as always, I'd like to welcome my co-host, Jason Matthews. And yeah, let's get started.
So this is a topic that I absolutely love because not enough people understand how powerful silence can be. They usually see the cost that comes from staying silent, or they believe that the only product of silence is a cost. And really, there are three ways that silence can be interpreted. And the first one, most men that experiences know, and this is it is the cost, the show of weakness, where you say nothing because you feel intimidated or you feel that you are insufficient in some way, or that you are lacking something, or that you there is something that is wrong. And instead of speaking power to it, or giving it some kind of life other than what you see it as, you allow others to see you for how they want to see you. And that silence becomes a sort of um a um a proof of the way in which you feel about yourself that others then detect, and so then they use that as their reality of you. And that's one that I know very well, especially when I was younger. I used to be the kind of person who was silent that way. I didn't want to rock the boat. At the same time, I didn't defend myself enough when I needed to. And sure, there's a lot to be said about when you try to defend yourself, you lose. At the same time, if you are silent at the wrong time, you also lose. So it's really important to understand where that difference is. And we're not going to be talking about that beyond just describing it. The second one that Jason brought up is using silence as a weapon. And this is when you're dissatisfied, or with someone or something, and you decide to um, take away your attention. You treat your attention as a resource, and you punish others by taking your attention away. And part of that attention is through communication. You cease communication with that person. And this is toxic. You see a lot of posts all over the place, or a lot of different instances where people do this, where they withhold their attention, they withhold their ability to communicate, they withhold their communication. And it's a way of saying, I'm dissatisfied with you. And what makes it so toxic is that this is nothing more than a parent-child relationship. You're treating yourself as the parent, and your significant other, usually this is a intimate relationship, you treat your significant other as a child. You treat them as if they are inferior in some way, where you have the right to withhold attention from them and using that as a resource. As a kid, you were told you're grounded. And this is no different. Trying to ground your spouse, which is kind of comical because you're both adults. But it still exists, where a person is going to evaluate and judge a person whether they are worthy of your time and attention in that moment. And if they aren't, you withhold attention. And I'm not saying that you as individuals, I'm saying the collective you, as in people who do this. I find that people who want to control their environments, they tended to do this more often. And it's sad because one thing that I found is that people who try to control their environment oftentimes have the least amount of control of themselves. I mean, is that something you've noticed, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced both of what you've talked about, in the forms of silence that are, kind of put us in a weaker light. And so, yes, I've been there where I felt like my voice wasn't, of, I didn't feel good about myself. So I withheld my voice. I didn't stand up for myself, which led to me being bullied at times and other things. And then, yeah, I've also experienced in the relationship where, communication was ceased. And unfortunately, I actually did that as well because I was afraid to, um, the way I see it was I was afraid in those times to speak up because I didn't want to defend myself or just didn't want to rock the boat, or I was trying to avoid an uncomfortable conversation that I didn't want to admit to something or didn't want to, whatever. There was a lot of underlying stuff behind where I was playing silent and stuff like that. And so, when you talk about these things, yeah, I've experienced it heavily in my life, and I've now, coming to where I am now, I do see where those forms of silence are not healthy, not only for myself, but they're not healthy for the people that I'm in relationship with. And so I'm looking forward today to talking with you about, how silence can be used in a proper way to not only establish a stronger sense of communication, but also to establish a form of leadership within your relationships and different areas of your life.
Yeah, and so that's where we're going to be focusing most of our attention. It's important to understand the first two, but really the best way to combat those is to understand how to communicate with silence. Because silence isn't can be used other than just a form of toxic punishment or as a signal of retreat. It actually has communication value. And when you see it as having a, as having value in communication, you begin to understand how valuable it can be. And it also shows how you can take control of a certain frame and how you can use silence as a way of being able to negotiate in your favor for situations that you want to see realized. So a good way of looking at this is if if someone is if you have a goal and that goal has been stated and you know that this goal is something that is going to help you and others, it is not just something that is for you, it is for the betterment of many concerned where you are one of those many, and you meet someone who is attempting to hijack or to manipulate certain things in a way that's best suited for them, the worst thing that you can do is try to argue with them. The reason why, this sounds very counterintuitive, but the reason why is because when you argue with them, what you're doing is you are arguing within their frame. You are resisting them within their frame. And that never works out well. Even if you win the argument, you might have won the battle, but you've lost the war. Because a person who has a degree of willpower to move in a certain direction, when you argue with them, all that you're doing is feeding that energy. They realize that their way of looking at things has purchase. And so they're going to continue moving in that way. They're going to test you and they're going to try to wear you down, try to argue you out into exhaustion so that you no longer have the power to fulfill your goal. And therefore, they win by default. And this is something that I had to learn very much the hard way. I used to argue countless times and thinking that by arguing and defending my position and trying to prove someone why my position was better, that I was winning. And in some cases I did because we both had mutual respect. It wasn't where one of us had an agenda where we wanted to make sure that our idea was the one that won. We wanted to actually have a mutual discussion on which idea to move forward. That's great, but that's also not going to be guaranteed. A lot of times when a person has an idea of what they want to do, they don't care about the discussion. It's going to be their way. And the moment that you argue with them is the moment that you lose. And this is where silence has so much power. And what it does is it doesn't withhold communication, it preserves communication. And it preserves communication in a way that are you are directing is the best way to put it. So here's an example. Let's say that you have a goal and you have someone who has a competing goal, and you say, well, I think that we should move this way. And the person then is going to try to bait you into an argument saying, well, why can't we do it this way? Why does it have to be that way? The wrong thing to do is to explain yourself. And this seems very counterintuitive to people who want to go along to get along. Even as I say this, I can hear other people, even though this is a recording, I can hear the tension building up in people's gut. Like, oh, why would I do that? Why would I just say nothing? That's disrespectful. It really isn't. And the reason why I say this is because the person that you are confronted with doesn't give a shit about you. They care about their goal, period. You have to have the same kind of respect for your goal they do for theirs. And if you know that your goal is the right one, to argue against them is a losing proposition. Instead, if they say, well, why can't we move in this direction? Why does it have to be that way? Assume that your direction is the only direction to move in and move. Don't argue, don't explain, just go. If you can't go, stay silent. If you have to get someone else's input, the best thing that you can do is you can wait for that person to negotiate against themselves, argue against their point. There's a rule in sales and negotiation that says the person who speaks first loses. This is after the initial confrontation, the initial consultation or communication happens. The initial communication is two people bid their idea. The person who then argues first loses. And what that means is if you are the person who has the better idea as well as the better conviction, you're not going to argue first. You're going to make a statement and you're going to make it the last thing that you say. And silence in this way is very tense. It builds tension very quickly. And when you are in a position where one person has to give, or one person has to capitulate to the other direction, by staying silent, you force the other person to feel that tension and to speak first, as long as you can, as long as you can withstand the tension. As long as you can withstand the tension and they cannot, you win. And by winning, what you do is you get someone else to begin to argue against themselves. They speak first, and all you do is listen. And the more they talk, the more they realize that their idea probably isn't the best. And so they're willing to be more open to what you have to say because they've exhausted their energy trying to defend their idea that has no defense. They're arguing against their own idea. And so then your idea just wins. And it is a very powerful strategic tool to use when used in the right way. And when I say in the right way, what I mean is making sure that whatever the goal is, or whatever the idea that you have is, it has to help more than one person. It has to be of benefit to others. It has to be something that you see as being beneficial to many other people. And then you have to have the blind conviction to want to see it through more than other people. I've done this before in the right way as well as the wrong way, where I have had that kind of conviction and it was misplaced because where I thought it was a good idea for others, really, I was just arguing for myself. And it didn't work out very well. I won the argument, but it proved to be a bad argument. I've also done this in the correct way, where I have had a great idea. There was someone who had a conflicting idea. I knew that was going to be less powerful, and I did not argue with them. I just understood that my idea was going to be best. They had a lower threshold for the tension than I did, and they then came around to accepting my idea. We went forward and it actually worked. It really depends on your conviction, because silence in this way has to have conviction. When you're communicating with silence, there has to be conviction. I know that I've been speaking for a while, so I really want to hear what you have to say, Jason, about this, because I don't want to just keep on rambling.
Well, I know I really appreciate everything you've just shared there, Jason. As I've been listening to what you have to say, and grappling with this idea of how to use silence in a strategic way that really, what we're looking for is, I believe, ultimately, when we're looking to move forward with things, is to create an environment where it's a win-win for everybody. And when you are talking about expressing your ideas and then getting into the argumentative state of the back and forth between trying to defend your idea and versus the other person's opinions and stuff like that, and how that really weakens you in that position, is really interesting, because I do see that. I've seen that in myself, where I felt really convicted about something, and then I got into this position where I felt like I had to defend myself in that conviction. And and it does put you into a position where you're on defense instead of offense, and that's challenging, because then your mind starts overthinking and all this other stuff. At least it has for me. That's been my experience. And then you stop listening to what the other person has to say. And that's, I think, another disservice that you do to that person, is when you're trying to defend yourself and you're thinking ahead of, okay, well, he's bringing up this argument, I got to bring up that argument. You're no longer listening to what the other person is saying. And so what I'm gathering for what you're saying with this silence, it gives you the opportunity to be more present, to hear what is being presented. And sometimes, yes, we can be very convicted that our way, our idea, is the best way to move forward. But if we're caught in that idea of arguing to withhold a stand on that hill, we lose the beauty of insight from others. And even if their arguments aren't necessarily going to sway your position, you at least have given them the gift of your presence. You're giving them the gift of them being able to speak their thoughts, and it may actually present something to you that may be of value that you may not have seen before. And so I think, when I'm hearing what you're saying with this idea of silence, there's so much that can be brought out of it when you use it properly as a tool, versus getting caught up in this idea, I gotta defend myself at all costs.
And this is a huge realization for people to make, because once they understand how defending yourself at all costs is a losing proposition, and when they understand that through their silence they can get more compliance and more buy-in from other people who want to see it move forward, and then see the excitement when they realize, oh wow, this is a really a worthy cause, because it has benefit for more than just one person, and they can see the vision of where it's going to go, and then they want as much as for themselves as they do for the person who had the initial idea. That's a beautiful thing, and that can only be realized if you have the conviction to state what it is that you want to do, defend it once, and then move forward. So this is a piece that I kind of forgot to add. When you have a competing set of ideas, the one thing that you want to do is you want to establish the fact that you have no wiggle room. You have no room for doing something different. And as an example, let's say that you are let's use a business example. Let's say that you have a business model that is going to not only save a company millions of dollars, but is also going to provide great benefit to consumers by producing a better way of doing things that they're going to enjoy. It is going to increase the bottom line and is also going to create scale. But someone else has a another idea that they think will help the business by retaining more capital, raising prices, and eliminating some products that people have been using because they don't make as much money, which could hurt the bottom line, but they're looking just at the bottom line. Someone who is going to be argumentative is going to try and show the cost benefits, why their idea should be implemented instead of the worst idea, and basically arguing the all of the points, but they're going to be losing energy because the person who is competing with them is probably going to use that in a way of being able to show why that idea isn't worth it. Although another alternative is you state that your idea, they state their competing idea, and you say, no, it's not going to work. That's not going to work because this, and this. This is the better way to move forward. And I think we should do it this way. Put forth a plan and shut up. And then when the other person tries to argue, you don't take the bait. You do not take the bait. You just say, I've said everything that needs to be said. I don't have to explain myself any further. And a person who is interested more in their own idea is going to keep on explaining why they should be considered. But the more you explain something, the more energy you bleed. And as you are bleeding energy, you are losing credibility. And as you are losing credibility, the likelihood of you being taken seriously goes way down. And this is why it's so important to say something, say it once, explain it one time as to why it should move forward in this way, and then stop talking. As if what you've said is now the word of the law. And again, it has to be something that is going to be beneficial to more than just one person. It cannot be a self-serving idea where you expect that everyone is going to buy into it simply because you want them to. That is a bad recipe. Because even if it's accepted, people are going to realize that you were out only for yourself, and you are going to lose trust in the people that decided to trust you. And then the next time you want to make a move, it's going to be diminished. Your ability to make a move is going to be diminished, and it's not going to go the way you want it to. Instead, making sure that the idea that you have, excuse me, the idea that you have is of the best benefit for all concerned, and you are making sure that you showcase that in your vision, and then stop talking so that people understand what you're doing and why. And now people are going to be examining just that, not examining your argument, but what you've just said. They're going to be looking at that as well as the argument someone else is going to put forth. They're going to say, yeah, this actually makes a lot more sense. It makes a lot more sense for me to go with this person who has just stated what the goal is, what the benefit is, and has said nothing else. This is someone that actually has a lot of good ideas, and we're probably going to go this way. And the more you're willing to have conviction by just stating what you need to state, and then being quiet without having to say anything else, the more likely you are to have positive credibility. Where now, when you say other ideas, when you have other things when you have other ideas and plans that you want to put forth, they're more likely to be taken seriously because you've shown benefit as well as conviction. And that silence has helped you maintain that conviction.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying there, especially around the idea of the benefits of multiples, right? Versus you as the individual. When I think of great leaders and things like that, those great leaders have a vision that goes beyond themselves in so many different ways. And to have the fortitude and the strength to hold onto that conviction as you've shared, and not have to be in this position or feel like you have to be in this position to defend it, really shows a lot about your character as well. And it does develop that sense of trust that you were mentioning as well with others that are around you in your sphere of influence, because they, yeah, that's an interesting, when I think about that idea of trust, right? Like people who trust leaders and follow, the principles that they put forth, or follow them along a path to, create great organizations that, have a huge impact on the world. There's a strength of character that comes with those leaders that people naturally feel drawn to, and have that innate sense of that they can trust this person. And and what that comes from that sense of confidence and assurance, but it also comes, they also have the ability to not only hold on to their convictions and their values, but they're also willing and able to recognize their faults as well in that, right? Like both you and I both admit and acknowledge that we don't know it all, and no leader really truly does know it all. We're always on a growth trajectory of some sort, or at least hopefully we are. And learning this tool of silence is one of those areas of growth that we can all really lean into.
And this is something that you can utilize in your behavior. So imagine if we're looking at this from a relationship standpoint, because a lot of the things that we talk about have to do with relationships. And so if you as a man are dating or you're even married, and you have a vision of the way that you want your family to move, or you want to create your family, or you want to create something that your family is able to benefit from as well as provide benefit to others, the best thing that you can do is one, have a plan. Two, state that plan as clearly as possible, including the benefit to yourself, to others, and the future benefits that will come from it. Three, show how that plan is going to, how each person in that within that sphere has a role, how they're going to play that role, and how that role is going to aid the goal. And then stop talking. Get them to buy in. And if your spouse has a competing idea of what they want to have happen, so let's say that you, as a man, say, "Well, what I want my family to do is I want to build a family that is going to that is going to emulate the values of trust, of humility, and of creating an ever advancing civilization. I want to create the bedrock for that." And you have a spouse that says, "Well, all I want to do is basically create as much money as possible in order to live comfortably. And I really don't care about all that other stuff. So what I want to do is this." And you say, "Well, that's not going to work for me because I don't believe that money is the end all be all." Yeah, it's going to help. And I think that a strong financial foundation is important, but it has to be more than that. We need to be moving in this direction. And here's why. State the reason why you want to move in that direction, and then stop talking. Make it as though you're going to move in that direction. Even have steps of what each person is meant to do to support that. And don't talk about it again. Don't argue about it anymore. You've stated your position. So when your significant other says, "Well, I don't want to do that," or I'm going to be doing this, or I think that we should be moving in this direction, or why is that? Why are you the one who gets to say? Why can't I have a say? Don't argue your point, because you've already stated what it is you want to have happen, what the vision of your family is. You are the leader of your family. And this is why it's so important for you to have the vision, to state the vision, and then just move forward with that vision. Because I guarantee you, a man who has purpose, vision, and the ability to act on that vision without having to explain themselves is going to have a partner who is going to see that they are about to be left behind. And if they are not comfortable with that, will follow because they have no other recourse. Men have a much stronger way of being able to create that vision, that plan on average. And this is shown throughout history. History has thousands of examples of this in both family as well as business and even in politics. It is much more likely that when a man has that conviction that he is going to have a positive result and he's going to attract the talent necessary to make that happen, both within his family and within his community.
And that's something really powerful that we need to recognize. And I mean, and it also communicates, a sense of other things that were really talked about in many of our episodes, and it's also about setting up boundaries in a sense, right? Where that's, when by not falling into the trap of arguing our point and all that sort of stuff, we're setting a boundary. We're like, okay, I've said what I have to say. There isn't really a whole lot more to argue about. Like, so we're going to just kind of, we're going to leave the communication at that space. If you have more questions to ask about it, then we can move forward. But yeah, there's really so much benefits to using silence as a proper tool to continue to open up and cultivate a stronger relationship. As that's what you and I are our primary objective here, working with the Forge and through Lifting the Soul Ministries, is to help men become strong leaders in their homes and in their communities, so that we can build a better society, and we can preserve the nuclear family, and help, because the nuclear family is a foundational bedrock of all society, and and so yeah, like, not only is it give us about boundaries, but it gives us a sense of resilience, because yeah, when that tension is there, when that pressure is there, you want to argue, but you just like, I'm just going to hold back for a moment, because this is going to set a precedent for us as a family, or as a whole. It's challenging, and so it's but it does speak a lot. Like, silence is huge. And there's one story I like to refer to a lot, and I refer to this story a lot in, sometimes or often, in my Life with Jason series. And it's the story where Jesus was confronted by the Pharisees with the woman who was caught in adultery. And they cast this woman on the ground in front of him, said, "This woman deserves to be stoned because of the law, whatever, she was caught in adultery." And Jesus said nothing. He just got down on his knees, got down to her level, and said nothing. And the power in that communication of him saying nothing, um, it forced the Pharisees to hold back in their arguments of what they were doing, because they were looking to condemn this woman, and they were looking to basically prove that Jesus was, had no authority or whatever, all this kind of stuff. There was a lot you can read into that story, but by him being silent in that moment really disengaged them and put him back into the position of authority that he has.
Jason, I thought that he did say something. I thought that he said that he was not sinned cast the first stone.
He said that afterwards. His first initial moment was silence. And it doesn't say how long he was silent for. He was just silent for a period of time. He got down on the ground and drew in the sand in silence. And then after that period of silence, that's when he made his argument. He who is without sin cast the first stone.
And I think that that is the most powerful moment right there, because once he said that, he made a declaration, and then he stayed silent after. He just didn't say anything afterwards. So now the people had to negotiate with their own morality,
Mm-hmm.
and they had to decide if they were without sin and could cast the first stone, and nobody could. No one could actually make that argument that they were worthy of passing judgment, because they themselves were also judging themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, and that's I think that is a powerful example of what we're talking about.
Mhm. And it goes to show that when you make a declaration and you have the conviction of the declaration, you don't have to say anything else. It is you have made a declaration that you are you have conviction behind. And when you have that conviction, especially, people have to evaluate themselves against that conviction. And this is why it's so powerful, especially in the family setting. If you as a man have conviction in the path you want to go, and you say, this is where we're going, and this is what it's going to provide, so we're going to move in this way, and this is how I need you to help. And you just state that and you move in your direction, no argument will suffice. Now the the path becomes proving that that plan against reality. Is this the way that it is going to work? Not arguing whether it's going to work or not, proving that it's going to work. You now have to create the proof that what you are saying is going to work. And silence helps to do that. It helps to initiate that proof of action rather than the instability of argument, which then causes things to exhaust and not become fulfilled. The less you argue, the more likely you are to create the opportunity for proof. And if it proves that you are successful, now people see you as having real value, because not only have you made a plan, but that plan has, even to some degree, provided some success. It's never going to work out the way that you want it to all the time. That's impossible. But you can show reasonable success for any kind of plan simply by having the conviction and then testing the theory that you are correct.
Yeah, and that's huge, and that's where the growth really happens, right? Like, it's is really in holding still, holding on to that conviction, and moving forward. The silence is not about inaction either. That's the other thing I think we're really wanting to drive home here. Like, you know, the silence we're talking about is one that moves us into a direction, puts us onto a path forward, and and that's something that I believe we really need to focus on as well when it comes to anything. And because if we don't move or we don't have action, then the theory, the idea, the leadership principle we want to move forward with has no real bite to it. And that's where people then lose trust with us and stuff like that. So this is really about a form of communication that sets us into a direction, that sets us into motion, that may not 100% work out, but it puts us in a direction that can build the trust, that can build momentum and bring people alongside us, bring our spouses alongside us as we move forward with the direction of the family. And one of the things that have really been coming up for me a lot lately is the idea of legacy. And legacy is the difference between a dynasty and a legacy is a dynasty is all about yourself. I'm going to build wealth. I'm going to do all this so that I can live this comfortable lifestyle, and that's it. I don't care about anybody else. Whereas a legacy is about putting something into motion for not only your benefit, but for the benefit of the greater whole. And 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 to be able to have that conviction to use silence strategically to move you in a direction towards that legacy Yeah, let's go for it.
One of the best ways that I've understood a dynasty versus a legacy is a dynasty has history, whereas a legacy has future.
Hmm.
And the biggest difference between that is something that has already been done, but is not set up to continue moving in that direction. So one thing, one leader that I have followed a lot is Ken Blanchard. He's one of my favorite leadership speakers and authors and just practical people. He's an amazing human being. And he talks about building a legacy quite often. And the best way to build a legacy is, yes, you might be the person who initiates it, but it's not about you. It's taking yourself out of the equation and understanding that once you have a set of rules and you have parameters in place, you have boundaries in place, that eventually you can take yourself out of that position of leadership and it will still work without you. And that is the mark of a true legacy. And anyone who's interested in creating a legacy, stay tuned. We've got plenty of things to talk about regarding that as well. The, the legacy that you create, it might start with your family, but remember, your children are part of that legacy. And the way that you interact with your children, the way that you teach them, and the way you mold them, the way that you prepare them for their lives is going to be a direct it's going to be a direct reflection on how you see yourself, how you see the world, and how you see others, and how you see your goals and what can be possible. If you are a parent who just kind of goes with the flow, goes with the trends, just allows your children to grow up as they need to by experiencing reality on itself without any kind of guidance, you're going to create a certain result. If you're the kind of parent who understands that reality is there and that your children need your wisdom in order to correctly synthesize what they experience, to look at it from a specific perspective where they are allowed to, yes, test their reality and maintain the values that will allow them to grow into great reflections of your beliefs, that's a very different kind of outcome. And that's going to be an outcome when people look at your children and they look at you and say, you did something right. They're going to look at you and look at your children and say, your parents did right by you. And you have the kind of wisdom that is rare with people your age. All that you did was give them the perspective they needed to see reality for what it is and base the decisions on the morals, values, and motivations that you instilled with them and that you guided with them. You guided them with. And if they aren't willing to take it, that's on them. But eventually, they will see the wisdom in what you have imparted to them. And the more chaos that is introduced in a family, the longer it's going to take for that wisdom to click. But the less chaos in a family, the sooner it's going to click. And I think we're getting a little bit off topic, but it's also something to really talk about because it does kind of feed into it. Because when you have that conviction where you say, this is where we're going, you don't argue about it, you just do. Your family sees that, your children see that, and they see the success that you have both in your family and within your community. They're like, I want to be like that. And so the silence that you started with becomes the legacy that you create.
And that's basically where I was going with this is, because when we're talking about homes and stuff like that, and everything, and when there's a lot of dynamics that can happen in the home that can be not great for the family dynamic. And when you're in that argumentative state all the time, and stuff, you know, you can set a bad standard for your family. And so, using this idea of silence can really help build a foundation for creating an environment where proper communication can come into play. Because if you're always in argument sort of state, it becomes a standard. We're always going to argue. We're always going to butt heads. We're always going to do this, right? But if we create an environment where communication can be done effectively, where a point can be presented, and yes, but communicated and talked to in a healthy way. But if it becomes just our if the first reaction is always to argue the point, then you're not going to get anywhere. And so by creating this standard where, okay, I'm going to present what I have to say, I'm going to present my why I believe it. This is the way it should be, and leave it at that. You know, I mean, it's not shutting down communication. It's actually saying it's actually just solidifying it in a way.
Exactly. And it's really important to respect the silence for exactly what it is. It is not an omission or it is not a retreat. It is simply the lack of argument and the willingness to move forward after a plan has been put into action. That's really where silence has its benefit. Not as punishment, not as a retreat, as a declaration and then action. Instead of talking about it, you are doing something about it. And I think that is probably the biggest lesson you can take away from this is that silence is a great tool for communication and using it as a way of being able to bolster your conviction is going to be one of the best ways that you can use this.
Yeah, and I think when we think about this as we've kind of repeated this idea a fair bit, so I believe we're getting the point across. At least I hope so. But the idea of this is it is a deliberate response because it helps us to speak more intentionally. I believe is where we're getting at. It helps us speak more intentionally. It helps us present our ideas in a more strategic way, and when it's done, it's not about avoiding. It's actually about it's about conviction when it's really used properly, and when leaders choose to be quiet, it it builds that trust because people start to say, okay, he's really convicted about what he's talking about. He doesn't have to argue it. He doesn't have to come to a point where he feels he has to defend himself on it. And when you have that kind of conviction, people tend to follow more closely, pay more attention. And that's important to realize.
So I think that we've pretty well covered this one, and I'm sure that if there are going to be comments that we'll be able to address them in the next show before we get to the next topic. But yeah, I feel good about this one, about leaving it right here. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, I agree, Jason. And and as always, we're very thankful for the time you guys put into listening to what Jason and I have to share. Our hearts are to serve you guys to awaken the leadership potential within ourselves as we continue to grow every day, and to put forward ideas and bring conviction to the men that we serve, the families that we serve, because we want to create a better society for everybody. And the best way for us to be able to do that is for you guys to help us out. And the way you guys can help us out is by not only liking this video, giving us feedback, comments, sharing this video with others, and letting others know about the mission that we're on, so that we can help and serve others to the best of our abilities. And so we'll leave it at that, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely follow and share. And that way you'll always get the notifications of when we have our next episode. You'll be able to leave comments and absolutely share with other people so that they can all, especially other men that you know could use this information. Because that's how we build this community, by helping others understand that there are resources, there are tools, and there are people who understand that men are going through it. And there is a place for them to really get great advice that they're not having to pay for. This is free. So make use of it. Help us help others. So yeah, looking forward to seeing you on the next episode, Jason, and I'm looking forward to sharing more wisdom for everyone to be able to benefit from.
All right, bye for now, everybody.